You ever wonder how one man controlled 90% of America's oil and became the richest person in human history? Here's how Rockefeller actually did it, and the strategy was way darker than you think. Cleveland, Ohio, February 1872. It's 2 a.m. John D. Rockefeller is sitting in his office on the top floor of the Standard Oil building. He's 32 years old. There's a single lamp burning on his desk. Outside, it's snowing. The streets are empty, but Rockefeller isn't alone. Sitting across from him are 23 men, oil refiners, his competitors. They've been called here in secret. Nobody outside this room knows this meeting is happening. And every single one of them is terrified. See, 3 hours ago, each of these men received a visit. A representative from Standard Oil knocked on their door with a message. Mr. Rockefeller would like to speak with you tonight. Come alone. Now they're here. Rockefeller hasn't said a word yet. He's just looking at them, one by one, letting the silence build. His face shows nothing, no emotion, just cold calculation. Finally, he speaks. His voice is quiet, almost gentle. Gentlemen, the oil industry is in chaos. We're all losing money. There are too many refineries, too much competition. It's destroying us all. He pauses. Let's that sink in. Here tonight to offer you a solution. You can sell me your refinery. I'll pay you a fair price, cash today, or another pause, longer this time, or I can destroy you. I have agreements with the railroads, special rates you'll never get. I can ship oil for half what you pay. I can undercut your prices until you're bankrupt. It'll take me 6 months, maybe less. One of the men starts to stand. Rockefeller holds up his hand. Sit down, I'm not finished. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sell tonight or tomorrow. The price I'm offering drops by 20%. The day after that, another 20%. By the end of the week, I'm offering nothing. And then I just wait for you to go bankrupt and buy your assets for pennies. The room is dead silent. You can hear the clock ticking on the wall. So, gentlemen, what's it going to be? By sunrise, 21 of those 23 men had sold. The other 2 held out for 3 months before they cracked. And this wasn't a one-time thing. This was Rockefeller's strategy. This was how he built the largest monopoly in American history. This was the beginning of Standard Oil. I'm Alex Morgan. This is Behind the Billion, and today we're breaking down John D. Rockefeller, the man who became the richest person in human history. And look, when I say richest, I'm not talking about Elon Musk rich or Jeff Bezos rich. I'm talking adjusted for inflation. Rockefeller's peak net worth was somewhere between $400 billion and $600 billion. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever been that wealthy before or since. So I spent the last 2 weeks reading everything I could find about this guy. Ron Cherno's biography, 900 pages, incredibly detailed. Original Standard Oil documents, congressional testimony from the antitrust hearings, letters Rockefeller wrote to his son, financial letters from the 1870s that are now archived in public. And here's what I found. Everyone knows Rockefeller was ruthless. Everyone knows he built a monopoly. But what people don't understand is how he did it. The actual strategy, the specific tactics, the moment-by-moment decisions, because it wasn't just about being mean or aggressive. It was way more sophisticated than that. It was actually genius. Dark genius, but genius nonetheless. Let me take you back to the beginning. 1839, Rockefeller's born in Richford, New York, upstate, rural. His dad is literally a con man. I'm not exaggerating. William Rockefeller traveled around selling fake cancer cures. Called himself Dr. William Livingston, even though he had zero medical training. He'd disappear for months at a time, show up with money, leave again. Turns out he had a second family in Canada that John didn't know about until he was an adult. The guy was a complete fraud, but his mom, Eliza, she was the opposite, deeply religious, Baptist, strict in a way that's hard to imagine today. She raised John and his siblings with this intense Protestant work ethic. No drinking, no dancing. No card playing, no wasting money, no wasting time. Everything was about discipline and self-control and service to God, and you can see both of these influences in who Rockefeller becomes. From his dad, he learns negotiation, manipulation, how to read people, how to spot weakness, how to close a deal. There's this story that his dad used to loan him money at 10% interest when he was a kid, 10% to his own son. Young John would work odd jobs, chopping wood, raising turkeys to pay back the principal plus interest. That's insane. What kind of father does that? But it taught John something crucial. Money is a tool, business is a game. Emotion has no place in it, and the only rule is win. From his mom, he gets discipline, religious conviction, this unshakable belief that success is a form of divine blessing, that God rewards hard work and punishes waste. That accumulating wealth isn't about greed, it's about stewardship. You're managing God's resources. Rockefeller would carry this belief his entire life. He genuinely believed that building Standard Oil was God's work, that eliminating competition and creating efficiency was morally righteous, that he was chosen to bring order to chaos. Now here's something most people don't know about young Rockefeller. When he was 16 years old, he spent 6 weeks looking for his first job. 6 weeks. Every single day, he'd put on his suit, the only suit he owned, and walk from business to business in Cleveland asking if they needed help. He kept a notebook, wrote down every business, crossed off the ones that said no. And when he got to the end of the list, he'd start over from the beginning. He hit the same businesses 2, 3, sometimes 4 times. Most places thought he was annoying. Some felt bad for him, but Rockefeller didn't care. He wasn't embarrassed. He just wanted a job. And he knew that persistence would eventually pay off. Finally, on September 26, 1855, a commission merchant firm called Hewitt and Tuttle hired him as an assistant bookkeeper. $3.50 a week. Rockefeller was so grateful, so excited, that he celebrated September 26th as job day for the rest of his life. More important to him than his birthday. He'd give speeches about it, write about it in letters. That tells you something about his psychology right there. The job mattered more than the celebration of his birth, and he was incredible at the job, obsessed with it. He'd arrive early, stay late, check numbers 3-4 times. He'd find errors in the books that senior accountants had missed. He understood the flow of money in a way that most people just don't. Within a year, he was basically running parts of the business that should have been handled by people twice his age. After 3 years, he asked for a raise. He was doing work worth $800 a year. He calculated it, had the numbers ready, but they were paying him $500. He presented his case. Logical, calm, backed by data. They said no. They appreciated his work, but no, so Rockefeller quit, just walked out. He was 19 years old, no backup plan, no safety net, just absolute confidence that he was worth more than they were paying. And this becomes a pattern you see throughout his career. He knows his value. He never settles for less, and he's willing to walk away from anything that doesn't serve his long-term vision. He teams up with a guy named Morris Clark, another young guy, early 20s. They pool their money, about $4,000 between them, and start a commission merchant business. This is 1859. They're buying and selling commodities, grain, meat, whatever, and they're doing well, making about $4,000 in profit the first year, which is solid. Then the Civil War starts. And commodity prices go absolutely insane. Food, supplies, everything the army needs, prices double, triple. Suddenly Rockefeller and Clark are making serious money. By 1863, they've got $17,000 in capital. They're successful by any measure, but Rockefeller's watching something else. The Pennsylvania oil boom. Edwin Drake had struck oil in Titusville in 1859, first commercial oil well in American history, and it kicked off this rush. Thousands of people flooding into western Pennsylvania, drilling wells, building refineries, some getting rich overnight, most losing everything. Rockefeller studies it obsessively. He visits Titusville, talks to drillers, refiners, distributors, reads everything he can find, financial reports, technical papers, newspaper articles, and he comes to a conclusion that changes everything. The money's not in drilling. Drilling's a gamble. You might strike oil, you might drill dry holes. It's speculation. Luck, the money's in refining, taking crude oil and turning it into kerosene for lamps. That's a business. Predictable inputs, predictable outputs, scalable, and if you can achieve efficiency, if you can refine more kerosene per barrel of crude than your competitors, the margins are enormous. So in 1863, Rockefeller and Clark build a refinery. They partner with a guy named Samuel Andrews who actually knows the chemistry and engineering. They invest $4,000. Build it in Cleveland, which is perfect, right between the Pennsylvania oil fields and the big markets in New York and the East Coast. And from day one, Rockefeller's obsessed with making it the most efficient refinery in Cleveland. Not one of the best. He's there constantly, watching the process, timing how long each step takes, measuring input and output, calculating yield rates. He figures out they can extract more kerosene per barrel if they run the crude through the stills twice. Costs more in fuel and time, but the yield increase more than pays for it. Most refiners won't do this. They're focused on throughput, how many barrels per day. Rockefeller's focused on efficiency, how much product per barrel of input. He's also negotiating everything. The price of crude, the price of barrel, sulfuric acid for the refining process, shipping rates, every single input cost he's working to drive down. He's got notebooks full of calculations, cost per barrel, cost per gallon. Margin at different price points. There's this great story about barrel production. Refineries need barrels to ship kerosene. Most refiners buy them from Cooper's barrel makers. Rockefeller's buying barrels at $2.50 each from the cheapest supplier in Cleveland. One day he visits the Cooper shop, watches the whole production process, and he realizes he can make them cheaper himself, so he does. Buys wood, hires Coopers, sets up his own barrel-making operation. Gets the cost down to $1.50 per barrel. That's $1 saved per barrel. They're shipping thousands of barrels. It adds up fast. That's the Rockefeller mindset. If you're paying someone else, you're giving away margin, and margin is everything. Margin is the difference between surviving and thriving. Margin is power. Within 2 years, his refinery is the biggest in Cleveland, processing 500 barrels a day, making real money. But Rockefeller and Clark start fighting about expansion. Clark wants to be conservative. They've got a good thing going, don't risk it. Rockefeller sees the opposite. He can see the industry is going to consolidate. Right now there are hundreds of small refineries, overcapacity, too much competition. In 5 years there will be a handful of large ones, and if you're not one of them, you're dead. The arguments get heated. They can't agree. So finally they decide to auction the business. Whoever bids higher buys out the other partner. Winner takes all. It starts at $500. Clark bids $1,000, Rockefeller bids $1,500, back and forth, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. Clark's getting nervous. This is crazy money. The business isn't worth this. $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Clark's sweating. He's thinking Rockefeller's lost his mind. At $72,500, Clark stops. He can't go higher. He thinks he's made out like a bandit. He's walking away with more money than he ever dreamed of. Rockefeller says $72,500. No hesitation, sold. He borrows most of the money, takes full ownership, and Clark walks away thinking he won. But here's what Clark didn't understand. Rockefeller wasn't bidding on the current value. He was bidding on what it would become. He could already see 3 years, 5 years ahead. He knew exactly how he was going to scale it. He knew the competitive dynamics. He knew who'd survive and who wouldn't. And he knew that in 5 years that refinery would be worth $500,000, maybe more. He was right. Within 3 years, it's worth 10 times what he paid. Now we get to 1870. This is when everything changes. Rockefeller incorporates Standard Oil Company of Ohio. January 10, 1870. Capital, $1 million. That's massive for the time. He's got 5 partners, but he owns the largest stake, about 27%, and he's the president, and the oil industry at this point is chaos, total chaos. There are hundreds of refineries in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New York, Philadelphia. Everyone's competing on price. Nobody's making consistent money. When crude oil prices drop, refineries make money. When crude prices spike, refineries lose money. It's boom and bust. Boom and bust. Rockefeller hates this. He sees waste everywhere, refineries running at 50% capacity, duplicate distribution networks, everyone paying different shipping rates, different prices for supplies, no coordination, no efficiency. It offends him on almost a spiritual level, so he develops a plan. And this plan is so aggressive, so comprehensive, so ruthlessly executed that it'll make him the richest person in history, and also the most hated man in America. The plan has 3 phases. First, get leverage over transportation. Second, use that leverage to force competitors to sell. Third, integrate vertically to control the entire supply chain. Let me walk you through phase 1 because this is where Rockefeller shows his genius for understanding leverage. In the 1870s, if you're an oil refiner, you're completely dependent on railroads. That's how you move your product from refinery to market. There are no pipelines yet, no trucks. Railroads are it. Now, most refineries are small. They're shipping 1 or 2 train cars at a time, maybe 10 cars a day if they're big. They have no leverage. They pay whatever rate the railroad quotes, and the railroads charge whatever they think they can get away with. Rockefeller looks at this and has an insight. What if I could ship 50 cars a day, 100 cars? If I'm giving a railroad that kind of guaranteed steady volume, that's massive leverage. That's the kind of customer railroads compete for. So he starts consolidating. He's buying up small refineries in Cleveland. Not for their refining capacity, he can build that for their shipping volume, combining their shipments with his. And as he does this, his leverage with railroads grows. He goes to the railroads, the New York Central, the Erie, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and says, I can guarantee you massive volume, steady, predictable shipments every single day. I can fill entire trains, but I need better rates. Railroads listen. They're competing fiercely with each other. They need the volume, so they start giving Rockefeller special rates. He's paying $1.30 per barrel to ship oil from Cleveland to New York. His competitors are paying $2.40, almost half. Think about what that means. Your biggest cost after crude oil is transportation. If your transportation costs are half what your competitors pay, you can either undercut their prices and steal all their customers or match their prices and make way higher margins. Either way, you win, but Rockefeller's not satisfied with just getting better rates for himself. He wants more. He wants his competitors' shipments to actively benefit him. So he goes back to the railroads with a new proposal, and this is where it gets dark. He says, every barrel my competitors ship with you, I want a rebate, a percentage of what they're paying. You're going to pay me for their business. And unbelievably, the railroads agree. This becomes the South Improvement Company scheme. It's set up as a separate entity, technically legal at the time, but absolutely predatory. Rockefeller's not just getting cheaper shipping. He's getting paid every time his competitors do business. The more they ship, the more money he makes. It's genius and evil at the same time. Now this is supposed to be secret. Rockefeller's very careful about it. The contracts are confidential, but in early 1872, word leaks out. Some railroad clerk talks, and when the other refiners find out, they go absolutely insane. There are riots in the oil regions. Producers stop selling crude to Standard Oil entirely. They're burning oil in the streets rather than sell it to Rockefeller. Refiners organize boycotts. There are mobs. Actual mobs burning Rockefeller in effigy in Titusville. The governor of Pennsylvania gets involved. Congress launches an investigation. The public outcry is so intense that the railroad companies panic and back out. The South Improvement Company is dissolved. Rockefeller has to cancel the rebate agreements. On paper, it looks like he lost, like he tried something shady and got caught, but here's what actually happened. Those few months of special rates gave Rockefeller enough of an advantage to completely change the competitive landscape. He used that time to build up massive cash reserves. He locked in long-term contracts with major customers at prices his competitors couldn't match because his costs were lower. He bought crude oil futures at favorable prices. He expanded capacity. By the time the rebates got canceled, Standard Oil was already in an unassailable position. He'd used those few months to get so far ahead that even when everyone was back on equal footing, they couldn't catch up, and now comes phase 2, the Cleveland Massacre. This is February to March 1872. Over the course of 6 weeks, Rockefeller systematically approaches every single refinery in Cleveland, 26 companies, one by one, and he makes them all essentially the same offer. Oil industry is overcrowded. There's too much capacity. Most refineries are losing money. I'm proposing consolidation. Sell to me now at a fair price. I'll pay cash. You can walk away with money in your pocket, or refuse, and I'll use my cost advantages to undercut your prices until you go bankrupt. Then I'll buy your assets at auction for a fraction of what I'm offering now. It's not a request. It's not really a negotiation. It's a choice between 2 bad options. And here's the thing, Rockefeller's not bluffing. He has the cash reserves. He has the lower costs. He has the railroad relationships. He can absolutely do what he's threatening. Everyone knows it. Some of the refiners are actually relieved. They're struggling. They see the writing on the wall. They take the cash and get out. Others are angry, bitter. They feel like they're being robbed, but they can see the math. They know they can't compete long term. They sell a few refuse. They're going to fight. They think Rockefeller's overplaying his hand. They think there's room for multiple refineries in Cleveland. They're wrong. There's this meeting with a refiner named Isaac Hewitt. Big operation. Been in business since the early 1860s. Rockefeller shows up at his office with an offer. Hewitt refuses, says he's not afraid of competition. The Standard Oil isn't the only refinery that can run efficiently. Rockefeller doesn't argue, doesn't threat, just says, I understand, I respect your decision, good luck to you, and leaves. 3 months later, Hewitt's losing money on every barrel he refines. He can't match Standard Oil's prices. His customers are leaving, his creditors are nervous. He reaches out to Rockefeller. Can they talk? Is the offer still available? Rockefeller meets with him. Very polite, very cordial. Isaac, I'm glad you reached out. Unfortunately, the offer has changed. I'm now offering 40% less than my original price. The business has deteriorated, the value has declined. Has no choice, he sells at the lower price, and Rockefeller didn't have to yell or threaten or pressure. He just had to wait. Let economics do the work. By the end of March 1872, Standard Oil controls 80% of Cleveland's refining capacity. 26 refineries consolidated into one, and this gives Rockefeller massive economies of scale. He can negotiate better prices on everything: labor, supplies, crude oil. His cost per barrel is lower than anyone in the country, but he doesn't stop there. He takes the same playbook national, Pittsburgh, same strategy. Shows up with offers, some sell immediately, others resist. Within a year, he controls most of Pittsburgh's refining. Then Philadelphia, then New York, then Baltimore, every major refining center in America, and the playbook's always the same. Offer to buy. If they accept, great. If they refuse, undercut them until they collapse. Buy the assets. Consolidate. There's this incredible meeting that happens in Pittsburgh in 1873. Rockefeller's there to meet with a refiner named William Frew. Successful guy, been in business for years, proud of what he's built. Rockefeller makes his offer. Frew refuses, says he's not interested in being part of Standard Oil. Says he likes being independent. Rockefeller says, I understand, but think about what's coming. Industry is going to consolidate. In 5 years, there will be 3 or 4 large refineries and everyone else will be gone. You can either be part of the consolidation or you can be competed out of existence. It's your choice. Frew says he'll take his chances. 6 months later, he sells to Standard Oil at a lower price. By 1880, Standard Oil controls 90% of America's oil refining capacity. 90%. It's the most dominant monopoly in American history. More dominant than Carnegie and Steel. More dominant than any company before or since. But Rockefeller's not done, because Phase 3 is about vertical integration. It's about controlling not just refining, but every single step of the process, from crude oil in the ground to kerosene in the customer's lamp. He starts buying oil fields. Not all of them. He doesn't want the risk of exploration, but producing fields with proven reserves. This secures his crude supply. He buys pipeline, hundreds of miles of pipeline. This gives him control over transportation from the fields to his refineries. He buys storage facilities, tank cars, terminals. And he starts integrating backwards into inputs, making his own barrels instead of buying them, manufacturing his own sulfuric acid, making his own glue, even looking into timber operations to secure wood for barrels. I was reading through Standard Oil's financial ledgers. They're archived now at the Rockefeller Archive Center, available to researchers, and the level of detail is absolutely insane. Every single cost is tracked, every nail, every pound of solder, every gallon of acid, every barrel stave. Rockefeller knew all of it. There's this famous story that I want to expand on because it's so revealing. Standard Oil is making barrels for kerosene shipment. They're using 40 drops of solder to seal each barrel. That's how it's always been done. That's what the Coopers learned as apprentices. One day Rockefeller visits the barrel factory. He watches the production line, times each step, counts materials, and he notices the 40 drops of solder. He asks the foreman, why 40 drops? Have you tested fewer? The foreman's confused. That's how many you need. That's how we've always done it. Rockefeller says, humor me, test 39 drops, 38, see what happens. They run tests, fill barrels, ship them, monitor for leaks. Turns out 38 drops works perfectly fine. The seal is just as strong, just as reliable. That's a 5% reduction in solder per barrel. Doesn't sound like much, right? But Standard Oil is making millions of barrels per year. That tiny change saves them over $2,500 annually. In 1870s dollars, that's massive, and that's how Rockefeller thought about everything. Constant optimization, never accepting that's how we've always done it as an answer, always questioning, always testing, always measuring. Every fraction of a cent matters because it compounds across millions of units. By 1882, he set up the Standard Oil Trust. This is a revolutionary legal structure. Before this, if you wanted to own companies in multiple states, each one had to be separately incorporated. They couldn't coordinate, couldn't share resources or information, couldn't act as one entity. The Standard Oil Trust solves this. It's a holding company that controls 39 different corporations in different states, all reporting to the same 9-member board, all working toward the same strategic goals. It's never been done before. The legal innovation is as important as the business innovation. From a business perspective, it's brilliant. It allows Rockefeller to coordinate operations across state lines, to shift resources where they're needed, to implement best practices everywhere, to operate as one unified entity even though legally it's dozens of separate companies. From a competition perspective, it's terrifying, because now you're not competing with a single refinery or even a single company. You're competing with this massive, coordinated entity that has resources and reach you can't match. And this is when the public perception really starts to turn against Rockefeller, because Standard Oil isn't just dominating, it's crushing any potential competition before it can even start. Small refiners with innovative ideas can't get funding. Banks won't lend to them because competing with Standard Oil seems impossible. Alternative approaches to refining don't get tested because there's no way to get market access. The entire industry ossifies around Rockefeller's preferred methods, and innovation stops, progress stops. It's efficiency at the cost of dynamism. Enter Ida Tarbell. She's an investigative journalist, and she's got a personal reason to hate Standard Oil. Her father was one of the independent oil producers in Pennsylvania who got crushed by Rockefeller's tactics. She grew up seeing what consolidation did to small producers, the bankruptcies, the destroyed livelihoods. Starting in 1902, she publishes a series of articles in McClure's magazine exposing Standard Oil's tactics. She spends years researching, interviewing people who sold their companies to Rockefeller, digging through railroad records, finding leaked documents that prove the rebate schemes. Her articles are devastating. She exposes the South Improvement Company in detail. The midnight meetings where competitors were pressured to sell, the systematic use of economic leverage to destroy competition. She publishes documents, names, shows the receipts. The articles become a book, The History of the Standard Oil Company. It's published in 1904 and becomes a massive bestseller. And suddenly Rockefeller's not just a successful businessman, he's a villain, a robber baron, a symbol of everything wrong with American capitalism. Political cartoons show him as an octopus with tentacles strangling the economy. Preachers give sermons about corporate greed using him as the primary example. Parents tell their children, study hard so you don't grow up to be like Rockefeller. That's how toxic his reputation becomes, and it's not just public opinion. Congress launches multiple investigations. States start filing lawsuits. Ohio sues to dissolve the Standard Oil Trust under state antitrust laws. Texas bans Standard Oil from operating in the state entirely. Missouri sues. New York investigates. The legal pressure builds for years. And in 1911, after a long court battle, the Supreme Court rules that Standard Oil violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The company is ordered to break up into 34 separate independent companies. Now here's the wild irony. Breaking up Standard Oil makes Rockefeller way richer, because he owns shares in all 34 companies. And once they're independent and competing with each other, they become more valuable. The stock prices go up. The spin-off companies include ExxonMobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco. These become some of the most valuable companies in the world. Rockefeller's net worth literally doubles after the breakup. He goes from being worth about $300 million to being worth over $600 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's well over $400 billion. The richest person in human history. But by 1911, Rockefeller's already mostly retired. He stepped back from day-to-day operations in 1897 when he was 57 years old. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., takes over management of the family fortune, and Rockefeller spends the last 40 years of his life, he lives to 97, focused almost entirely on philanthropy. And this is the other side of Rockefeller that people don't talk about enough. He gave away more than $500 million during his lifetime. In today's dollars, that's about $16 billion. He gave away more than half his fortune. He founded the University of Chicago. The school was basically bankrupt. Rockefeller stepped in with donations totaling over $80 million over several decades, saved it, built it into one of the great research universities in the world. He founded Rockefeller University in New York. It's produced 37 Nobel Prize winners. It's one of the premier biomedical research institutions in the world. He funded the Rockefeller Foundation, which did groundbreaking work in public health. They funded the research that led to cure for yellow fever. They virtually eliminated hookworm in the American South. They funded malaria research, funded medical schools, built thousands of schools in rural areas, and he didn't just write checks randomly. He systematically professionalized the field of philanthropy, hired experts, did research, identified the highest impact opportunities, applied the same analytical rigor to giving money away that he'd applied to making it. There's this interesting tension in how Rockefeller saw himself. He genuinely believed that building Standard Oil was good for America, that consolidating the industry eliminated waste and improved efficiency, that the lower kerosene prices benefited ordinary consumers. And there's some truth to that. Standard Oil did dramatically reduce the price of kerosene, made it affordable for working-class families to light their homes, but the methods were brutal. The monopoly stifled innovation. The concentration of economic power was dangerous. The tactics destroyed lives and livelihoods. Small businessmen who'd built refineries from nothing lost everything. Towns that depended on independent refineries saw their economies collapse. I was reading Rockefeller's personal letters to his son. They're collected in the Rockefeller Archive, and there's this recurring theme, divine purpose. He writes things like, "I believe the power to make money is a gift from God. Just as surely as the instinct of self-preservation, the instinct for accumulation is a divine endowment, and it is our duty to use that gift wisely and for the benefit of mankind." He saw wealth not as personal achievement, but as moral responsibility. Not for personal luxury, Rockefeller lived relatively modestly, never spent more than he thought necessary, but as a stewardship obligation. He thought wealthy people were chosen by God to manage resources efficiently and redistribute them through systematic philanthropy. That's a remarkable worldview. And it justified everything he did. Every competitor crushed, every forced sale, every predatory tactic. It was all serving a higher purpose in his mind. God wanted efficiency. God wanted waste eliminated. God wanted resources concentrated in the hands of people who'd manage them properly. Therefore, building Standard Oil was righteous work. Think about the psychological framework required to systematically destroy hundreds of businesses and sleep well at night. You need to believe you're serving something greater than yourself. You need to see your actions as morally necessary, even when they cause real pain to real people. Now let's talk about what this means for building companies today. Because obviously you can't replicate what Rockefeller did. It's literally illegal. The antitrust laws, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, they were written specifically to prevent another Standard Oil. But the underlying principles, they're absolutely still relevant. Let me break them down. First, obsessive cost control. Rockefeller knew the cost of every input down to fractions of a cent. He was constantly finding micro-efficiencies that compounded into major structural advantages. You see this same mindset in successful companies today. Walmart's legendary operational efficiency. IKEA's obsessive focus on reducing product costs while maintaining quality. Amazon's relentless drive to lower prices and reduce waste. It's the same principle Rockefeller applied. Second, vertical integration when it creates real advantages. Rockefeller didn't integrate just for control's sake. He integrated when it reduced costs or improved margins or secured critical inputs. Making his own barrels saved money. Owning pipelines eliminated middlemen and secured supply. You see this today with Tesla. They make their own batteries, their own chips, their own software because it actually improves their cost structure and margins. But you also see failed vertical integration when companies build everything themselves without the discipline to ensure each piece actually adds value. Third, understanding where value concentrates in your industry. Rockefeller realized early that the money wasn't in finding oil, that was speculation. The money was in refining it, that was a business. And then he realized the real leverage was in transportation. Control shipping, control the industry. He identified the choke points and dominated them. Think about Google with search and digital advertising, Amazon with e-commerce logistics, Apple with the App Store, Nvidia with GPU chips for AI. They all control the critical choke points in their industries. Fourth, using scale to negotiate better terms. Rockefeller's shipping volume gave him massive leverage with railroads. His purchasing volume gave him leverage with suppliers. Scale creates negotiating power. You see the same dynamic today with Walmart supplier negotiations, Amazon's relationships with delivery partners, Netflix's content deals. When you're the biggest buyer or the biggest customer, you dictate terms, but here's where it gets complicated. Because Rockefeller didn't just compete, he systematically eliminated competition. He didn't just win, he made sure nobody else could play the game. He created barriers to entry that were essentially insurmountable. And that's the line that modern antitrust law tries to prevent companies from crossing. Look at Amazon. Jeff Bezos has studied Rockefeller. He said this explicitly in interviews and shareholder letters. Amazon uses scale advantages to offer lower prices. They've built vertical integration with AWS, fulfillment networks, devices, content. They control key choke points in e-commerce. It's the Rockefeller playbook applied to digital retail. But Amazon can't force competitors to sell to them. Can't make exclusionary deals that prevent competitors from accessing distribution. Can't create actual monopolies through predatory tactics. The legal framework prevents it. The FTC and DOJ watch for it. Same with Google. They dominate search not by destroying competitors through predatory pricing, but by being so much better that consumers and advertisers choose them voluntarily. That's a different kind of dominance, based on value creation rather than competitor elimination. The lesson is this: Rockefeller's framework for building scale advantages, controlling costs, integrating strategically, that still works. But it has to be executed within legal and ethical boundaries that simply didn't exist in his time. Here's what I find most interesting about Rockefeller's legacy. His business empire was broken up. Standard Oil as a unified entity doesn't exist anymore. But the Rockefeller family wealth has lasted 5 generations. His great-great-grandchildren are still wealthy. The family name still carries weight. The institutions he founded, University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, Rockefeller Foundation, are still doing important work more than a century later. So in a weird way, his long-term strategy succeeded beyond even what he built. Not the monopoly that failed, that got broken up. But the wealth creation, the systematic approach to philanthropy, the institution building. He created something that lasted far beyond the company itself, and maybe that's the real lesson. What you build matters less than what you do with what you build. Rockefeller's business practices were ruthless, often predatory, sometimes crossing ethical lines even by the standards of his own time. His business legacy is deeply complicated, brilliant in some ways, terrible in others, but his philanthropic legacy, that's largely positive. The University of Chicago educates tens of thousands of students. Rockefeller University has produced dozens of Nobel Prize winners whose discoveries have saved millions of lives. The Rockefeller Foundation's public health work eliminated diseases that killed children. That doesn't excuse the monopolistic practices. It doesn't make the forced sales okay. It doesn't undo the harm done to competitors who lost everything. But it does complicate the narrative. It means he's not a pure villain, not a pure hero. He's something far more complex. A man who built extraordinary wealth through questionable means and then tried to redeem himself, or maybe just fulfill what he saw as his divine obligation through extraordinary giving. The way you build your company, the tactics you use, the people you help or hurt along the way, that all shapes your legacy. It determines how history remembers you. It affects what happens to your wealth after you're gone. Rockefeller understood this eventually. That's why he spent the last 40 years of his life giving his fortune away. He knew how history would judge him if he only left behind Standard Oil and no institutions, no schools, no medical breakthroughs funded by his wealth. So that's the story. That's how John D. Rockefeller became the richest person in human history. Obsessive efficiency, ruthless cost control, leveraged transportation advantages, systematic vertical integration, strategic elimination of competitors through economic pressure, and disciplined, patient execution of a decades-long vision that most people couldn't even imagine. Was it genius? Absolutely. The man was brilliant. His understanding of economics leveraged competitive dynamics. It was decades ahead of his time. Was it ethical? That's a much harder question. By modern standards, clearly not. Even by the standards of his own time, many of his tactics crossed lines. Was it replicable today? Not in the same form, not with the same tactics. The laws prevent it, society won't tolerate it, but the core principles, maniacal cost discipline, strategic integration, scale advantages, chokepoint control, long-term thinking, those remain the foundation of how dominant companies are built today. You see it in Amazon, in Walmart, in Apple, in Google. The tactics are different, the ethics are different, the legal environment is different, but the underlying strategic framework. That's still Rockefeller. Alright, so that's the deep dive on John D. Rockefeller. That's how one man controlled 90% of America's oil and became the richest person in human history. The strategy was brilliant. The tactics were brutal. The legacy is deeply complicated. 6 decades of dominance built on efficiency and ruthlessness in equal measure. If this kind of deep research and case study analysis is valuable to you, if you want to understand how these empires were actually built, not the sanitized textbook version but the real story with all the darkness and genius, hit that subscribe button. I release new episodes every single day, deep dives into the founders and companies that changed the world, the specific decisions they made, the strategies they used, the lessons we can learn and apply. I'm Alex Morgan, thanks for listening to Behind the Billion.